So, it's not exactly stated why we're starting off with a genealogy here, although with a name for this book of the Bible, like Chronicles, I mean, okay, we're chronicling the story so far. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. If you want to catch up on what has happened in the Bible thus far, as we're going from Genesis to Revelation, and you don't want to necessarily go through all of the details of every single chapter, which of course you could do if you want, just look at my Bible study playlist for that. But if you'd rather catch up more quickly, I have a Bible abridged playlist where I take every single book of the Bible after I've completed it, break it down to just a couple of verses per chapter, maybe with a little bit of an explanation or like a summary of the chapter's events included as well. And that'll catch up to speed a bit quicker. But that might also not be so necessary for this book. You'll see when we get into it. Anyway, welcome back to our Bible study. So, we are starting our study of 1 Chronicles today. And from the look of it, we're going to get a bit of a recap at the start of this. So I don't know if I need to do too much with that. I will just mention at the end of 2 Kings, which we just finished, it pretty much ended with Jerusalem being taken over by the Babylonians. So the entire promised land that was, once where Abraham lived, and then, of course, people left to Egypt because of a famine, and then after being slaves there for a while, were rescued by God, essentially, and sent off back to the promised land. But they disobeyed God, stopped worshiping and following him, and all sorts of other bad things, and then God allowed them to be taken over. Because that was stated within the covenant that they collectively had all agreed upon beforehand, or at least their ancestors had agreed upon beforehand. So yeah, anyway, I'm not going to recap much more, because there's plenty of recap going on here, it seems. So we're starting off with like a genealogy of sorts, at least. So here we go, 1 Chronicles, chapter 1. The descendants of Adam were Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. Sons of Noah were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The descendants of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Rithath, and Togarma. The descendants of Javan were Elisha. Don't know if the extra H at the end there makes a difference in the pronunciation. Anyway, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanim. Okay, so I mean, obviously following from Adam to Noah is quite an obvious reason, because Noah and his family were the only ones to then survive the flood. And then there was it went from Noah's son Japheth specifically, although I guess we're about to get into Ham and Shem. So it's not exactly stated why we're starting off with a genealogy here, although with a name for this book of the Bible, like Chronicles, I mean, okay, we're chronicling the story so far. Note there, in verse 4, as in the Greek version, Hebrew lacks the sons of Noah were. Now, that could potentially get a little confusing then, because it would just list Shem, Ham, and Japheth after Noah, but those three were all in the same generation. Those were all Noah's sons. These were not all Adam's sons here. Like, Seth was Adam's son, but then I think Enosh was Seth's son, Kenan was his, and so on and so forth. So, yeah. Maybe that note was added there just for clarification. And then, right here, as in some Hebrew manuscripts and Greek version, most Hebrew manuscripts read Diphath instead of Riphath. Okay, it's one letter difference. It might make a difference in, like, the meaning of the name. I'm not aware of that offhand. Anybody who might know that, feel free to put something in a comment or in live chat or whatever. But to most of us, it's just kind of a name. Alright. Moving along. Verse 8. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabteka. The descendants of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on earth. Mizraim was the ancestor of the Luddites, Anamites, Lehabites, Naphtuhites, Pathrusites, Casluhites, and the Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. Canaan's oldest son was Sidon, the ancestor of the Sidonians. Canaan was also the ancestor of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. So, notice how it's getting into the various sons of Noah, because, like, there wasn't a great flood wiping out most of the people after that point. So, these were then the people who repopulated the earth and their descendants spread throughout. Honestly, this is probably very much focused on the area around the Promised Land and the people groups therein. So, that, I guess, might... maybe it's just wanting to go back and give some broader context for things as far as where all these people came from. And really, in a way, this almost kind of gets to the idea that, like, well, yeah, all these different people groups might have problems with each other, or might have had problems with each other, but they're all ultimately kind of related. And perhaps all these people groups also then got taken over and conquered and scattered by larger kingdoms like, say, Babylon or Assyria or whatever. And maybe at this point, you know, after Second Kings, they're all, like, sort of mingling together and perhaps realizing a little bit, like, hey, these are just other people. They have different beliefs, but, like, maybe the hatred for each other was a bit overblown. I don't know. That's me just speculating on things, but I mean, it is interesting how your perceptions of people can change when you actually interact with them on a regular basis. Anyway, we got some notes to cover in this section here. Okay, so that could say Egypt instead of Mizraim. Note there says Hebrew says Casluhites, from whom the Philistines came. Kaftar. Okay. So that wording just kind of changes the implication of which people group the Philistines came from. The way it reads in this translation, it's more like they came from the Kaftarites, but that wording, the wording in the note just seems a little odd, but then that also implies that the Philistines came from the Casluhites, not the Kaftarites. See Jeremiah 47:4 and Amos 9:7. I wonder if I should start making notes on what it says to look for in upcoming books of the Bible. I'm not going to do that. Just stuff you could keep in mind for cross-references. Hebrew says the ancestor of Heth rather than Hittites. Okay. I've never heard of any person or people group being called Heth in any previous verses in the Bible, at least as we've been reading through this. So, again, could be a different way of referring to the same people. I don't know. But, anywho. So, oh yeah, and these are all just descendants of Noah. I noticed later we're getting into Abraham's descendants, so we still got quite a ways to go in the genealogy. Let me not dwell on all this stuff too much longer. On to verse 17. The descendants of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, I don't know if that's the pronunciation, Lud, and Aram. Descendants of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah. Shelah was the father of Eber. Eber had two sons. First was named Peleg, which means division, for during his lifetime the people of the world were divided into different language groups. His brother's name was Joktan. Joktan was the ancestor of Almodad, Shelef, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were descendants of Joktan. So this is the family line descended from Shem: Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Reu, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and Abram, later known as Abraham. So, Shem's line specifically was the one that Abraham came from, which is important later on because, well, I mean, we'll get to it, but Abraham eventually was, the ancestor of, Jacob, later known as Israel, of whom the people group and the kingdom and now the country was named after. Anyway, do notes here. As in one Hebrew manuscript and some Greek, most Hebrew manuscripts lack the descendants of Aram were. See, but again, that could make it sound like, well, I mean, if it would, see, the previous thing like that, it was because, well, one thing was a collection of different generations while the other was one generation. I don't know if that's the case this time around. Anyway, this note says, as in parallel text Genesis 10:23, Hebrew reads and Meshech instead of Mash. Okay. But if Genesis had it one way, then why wouldn't you keep it consistent with what Genesis had? But perhaps Meshech was another way that the same people became known in later years. I don't know. And that's another thing too. All these different people and the, kind of cultural groups. I don't know if that's the best way to put it. But the people groups, at least, that they were like the namesakes of, like, those people groups might have then became known by other things later on. Anyway, note there at Obol, as in some Hebrew, in Syriac, most Hebrew manuscripts read Ebol instead of Obol. Right there. It seems like a lot of these notes are actually going to be that kind of thing, just saying that, hey, here's how we chose to translate this. It could also be read this way. Some Greek manuscripts read Arphaxad, Canaan, Sheila. Kainan? Sheila? Anyway. The only difference there is this lacks Kainan. And yes, I'm pronouncing it that way because, first off, that has an I in it. And second, that could get really confusing with Canaan. That's, all A's for the vowels. Alrighty. Moving along. Verse 28. Sons of Abraham were Isaac and Ishmael. These are their genealogical records. The sons of Ishmael were Nebaioth, the oldest, Kedar, Adbeel, almost flipped those consonants there, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jeter, Naphish, and Kedema. These were the sons of Ishmael. Sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine, were Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. The descendants of Jokshan were Sheba and Dedan. Sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were descendants of Abraham through his concubine Keturah. And never mind the fact that it didn't get into any of Isaac's descendants, but I guess we're about to follow that line here. So let me just read on then. There aren't any particular notes there anyway. So that was all essentially related to and perhaps even descended from Ishmael. But then we get to verse 34. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Sons of Isaac were Esau and Israel. Sons of Esau were Eliphaz, Reuel, Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. Descendants of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, Kenaz, and Amalek, who was born to Timnah. The descendants of Reuel were Nahath, Zerah, Shema, and Mizah. Gonna pause there for a sec because there's a couple of notes to look at. Israel is the name that God gave to Jacob. He was originally named Jacob, but after a wrestling match with God, or at least a representative thereof, he then became known as Israel. And again, he's like sort of the namesake of the people group, the kingdom that inhabited the promised land, which is honestly right where modern day Israel is, perhaps a slightly different geographical boundary to that, but definitely modern-day Israel was included in that. So, obviously, that country's name right now is derived from this guy. So, yeah. Then we have a note here. It says FO. As in many Hebrew manuscripts and a few Greek, most Hebrew manuscripts read Zephi or Zephi. Not sure of how the pronunciation is supposed to go in a lot of these cases. A, because I don't really know Hebrew, and B, because, like, some languages will have, like, okay, in this context, the vowel will sound like this, but in a different context, it'll sound a different way. So, yeah, anyway. Also, note there, Timnah. As in some Greek manuscripts, Hebrew reads Kenaz, Timnah, and Amalek. So, well, yeah, this says Amalek, who was born to Timnah. Which is an odd way, because it's like, okay, if you're going by generations, but then suddenly skip one, but then sit, like, why would you be changing the order of the generations? Unless Timnah was actually maybe like the same generation as Kenat, or I don't know. I can't recall off the top of my head. It may have mentioned this way back in, like, Genesis or something. But I honestly can't recall at the moment. Anyway, okay. On to the next section, starting with verse 38. The descendants of Seir were Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anna, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. The descendants of Lotan were Horai and Hemam. Lotan's sister was named Timnah. Same as that Timnah? Not sure. Anyway, descendants of Shobal were Alvin, Menahath, Ebal, Shipho, and Onam. Descendants of Zibeon were Aya and Anna. Son of Anna was Dishon. Descendants of Dishon were Hemdan, Eshben, Ithran, and Karen. Descendants of Ezer were Bilhan, Zavan, and Achan. Descendants of Dishan were Uz and Aaron. And good golly, okay, well, we got one more section left, but yeah, literally this entire chapter is apparently just genealogy stuff, and there might be even more after this, who knows. I'm sure somebody does, but anyway, we're not there yet. I'm not trying to get us ahead. Honestly, these are all just a bunch of names. I'm not saying they're insignificant, but, like, you're just, like, I'm still not sure why it's going through all this genealogy right now. Note there, as in parallel text, Hebrew reads Homam instead of Hamam. As in some Hebrew manuscripts, most Hebrew reads Shephi. So, once again, we have an O exchanged for an I. Most Hebrew manuscripts read Jachin instead of Achan. And Hebrew says Dishon, compare 138, and parallel text at Genesis 36:28. No, wait, 138 was still... Okay. That, yeah. So, like, is this one spelled different in some of the manuscripts than this one. That seems to be what it's implying. But in each little subsection here, it was going through the different descendants of Seir. So it doesn't really make much sense to... I don't know. Anyway. I won't get too caught up in that. Let's move along. Verse 43. These are the kings who ruled in the land of Edom before any king ruled over the Israelites. Bela, son of Beor, who ruled from his city of Dinhabah. When Bela died, Jobab, son of Zerah from Bozrah, became king in his place. When Jobab died, Husham from the land of the Temanites became king in his place. When Husham died, Hadad, son of Bedad, became king in his place and ruled from the city of Avith. He was the one who destroyed the Midianite army in the land of Moab. When Hadad died, Samlah from the city of Masrekah became king in his place. When Samlah died, Shaul from the city of Rehoboth on the river became king in his place. When Shaul died, Baal-Hanan, son of Akbor, became king in his place. When Baal-Hanan died, Hadad became king in his place and ruled from the city of Pau. His wife was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred and granddaughter of Me-Zahab. Then Hadad died. The clan leaders of Edom were Timnah, Alva, Jetheth, Aholibama, Elah, Pinon, Kenaz, Teman, Mibzar, Magdiel, and Iram. These are the clan leaders of Edom. Okay. And why do we care about all this? I mean, Edom was in the line of descendants somewhere in what we were reading previously, I think. Note there says before an Israelite king ruled over them. Yeah, I guess Israel did kind of conquer the Edomites at one point. So yeah, it's just going through a list of the people who ruled Edom before Israel. Now, okay, if you think before any king ruled over the Israelites, that, like, could be understood a little different than before an Israelite king ruled over them being Edom. Then again, I think Edom was part of the initial conquering of the Promised Land before it was really established as any kind of kingdom anyway. Never mind the time of the judges and all that. So, yeah. Anyway. Notes to look at. Where it says Pau, as in many Hebrew manuscripts, some Greek, Syriac, and Latin Vulgate. Most Hebrew manuscripts read Pi instead of Pau. Note there, Alva is an alternate reading of the Masoretic text. The other alternate reads Alaya? I think that's an I in there. Would be weird if... For a second I was like, wait, that doesn't say Allah, does it? No. So, okay. Bunch of genealogy to kick off First Chronicles. I imagine we'll eventually get past that. But, you know, if things are truly being chronicled, as in like a history, I suppose this is a notable part of it, recognizing where it all came from. So, yeah, we're starting off with just a big old genealogy. And, I mean, with a book named like Chronicles, I guess that makes sense. But I didn't... so I looked into it after this particular recording session, and it's actually kind of lengthy. So, I would not fault you too much if you want to just wait for a little while until we get to some not-so-genealogy videos. I'm probably going to be including in the thumbnail just like, alright, genealogy part 1, or like extensive genealogy part 1, or something to that effect. And then once you start seeing ones that don't mention the genealogy, then maybe you can tune back in if you're not interested in all that. I guess that's one way of giving some context for all the stuff that's happened so far. Chronicling, as the name of the book implies, the events thus far. As always, like and share. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel to get... I can't talk right now. Subscribe to the channel to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description for links to social media pages and all sorts of other good stuff there. Other ways to keep track of what I'm doing, including my Discord server, where we can chat about whatever outside of video formats. And there's also a link to my supporter page down there if you want to help support what's going on here, maybe help me upgrade my technology a bit so I can do some more things that'll make it more engaging and interactive. But all that kind of stuff is down there in the description. And below that, you can leave thoughts or questions in the comment section with whatever you got. So, that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. Whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.